Professor Zuber-Skerritt, convener of the third postgraduate research and supervision program funded by the Federal Department of Employment, Education and Training, Australia. Professor Zuber-Skerritt introduces this video program.
The videos are based on recordings of a staff development program for supervisors of postgraduate students in the newly amalgamated university campuses. This program was held at the Hyatt Regency on the Gold Coast of Queensland in Australia in September 1995. New university campuses, established since 1987, have experienced many exciting challenges. These can be observed in at least 4 areas. 1, staff facing the transition from a purely teaching role to the responsibilities as researchers and teachers of postgraduate research students. 2, staff having to teach increasing numbers of postgraduate students with reduced resources. This has often led to increased staff workload and stress. 3, universities facing increasing accountability to research students, society, employers and taxpayers. All these stakeholders have a legitimate right to expect this accountability in terms of quality outcomes and cost effectiveness. 4, staff being expected to upgrade their academic qualifications through PhD studies, while at the same time having to supervise postgraduate research students. How then can we assist the new university campuses in further improving the quality of postgraduate education and fostering an institutional research culture? This video series and accompanying written materials aim, first, to improve the quality of university teaching and learning at the postgraduate level in the new university campuses. 2, to develop postgraduate supervision skills in a way which will achieve a multiplier effect in each institution. 3, to provide support materials, of which these videos are a part, and which can be used by the participants and others in their own institutions. 4, to address existing and new issues in postgraduate supervision and generate solutions to these problems from the participants themselves, in conjunction with national and international leaders in this field. I hope you will appreciate the following video.
I'm very happy, as are all of the other facilitators, to be able to work with you during these 3 days. You represent significant people on your campuses, and you of course represent also the impact that the new universities and university campuses have had on the research culture. I know at Griffith University, the Queensland Conservatorium of Music, which is a part of us, and the Queensland College of Art have raised some really provocative questions at a philosophical level. First of all, what is research? How is performance? How is a creative work of art? How is a composition related to research? And what does that say to universities about how they define it? And of course, this has not only been a philosophical question, but one also that has affected how we define research. So I think it's an exciting group we have here today. I noticed too that in a number of staff development programs that we have, we put our life's blood into planning everything just perfectly. And at the end of it, when we ask for evaluations, we say, you know, what were the things that you enjoyed most or benefited most from? And usually people have pretty near the top of the list the opportunity of meeting other people who were at the workshop. And in order to take advantage of that, and I mean, I think sometimes we should just put a tea table out and just have everybody talk for the day. But what we're going to do is to work in groups of different kinds during this workshop. Today, we're going to be working in what we're calling key groups. The purpose of having key groups this first day is to have groups that are diverse, that are representing a mix of universities, mix male, female, to make them just as heterogeneous as possible, to try to enable people to get to know each other and to see the differences that might exist in their backgrounds. Let me explain just a bit about the groups that will be operating during this session. The groups today are called key groups. We will also be having home groups. These represent your university homes, essentially, and especially on the last day, you'll be working with the groups from your home universities. We also have, in addition to key groups and home groups, spontaneously formed groups. And these you'll be taking care of yourselves as the program proceeds. The key groups are key in that they do open the session. They're the basis for this first day's activities. They're really allowing an opportunity for you to get to know each other and also to learn your backgrounds, what you're hoping to gain or achieve in this workshop. Just very quickly then, the purposes of the key groups are to provide a group setting for today's activities, continuing, diverse, collaborative, and to provide a group setting for touching base, sharing benefits and concerns, and generating feedback for us. We also are going to have an initial task for these groups, and this set of tasks really has to do chiefly with how we're going to get to know each other and how we're going to determine what it is that we really hope to gain or achieve. We will be dealing with this question of what we hope to achieve or gain. There will be no report back session to the larger group until the end of the day, when we will have some time to reflect on what's been happening so far. Each group will need to have a leader to kind of ensure time management, essentially, that the tasks that are performed are done within the time and that you can finish. And this leader can also come back to us to act as a conduit if there are concerns that you would like to communicate to us as facilitators. We'd also like a reporter or a spokesperson who can do the report at the end of the day on what you've agreed are things that you hope to gain or achieve from the workshop. We'd like tables 1, 3, 5, and 7, the odd numbers, to have a woman as a spokesperson and a man as a spokesperson for the even-numbered ones. This morning then we'll be identifying expectations and needs, and you'll be working with this key group in the other sessions during the day, and finally at the end of the day reporting back on the results. For these next two overheads, I'll be giving you a copy of this, one copy for your group, just to remind you. In the next maybe 40 minutes, I guess, we'd like you to identify expectations and needs using a technique called doubling groups, which I will talk to you about in just a moment, and looking at the focal question, what do you hope to gain from or achieve in this workshop through these 3 days? The doubling technique essentially involves starting out with one person, that is yourself, writing down on the notepad that you have on your tables what you hope to achieve or gain from this workshop. That's a 3-minute activity. Then the group doubles, and there are 2 of you. You work with one other person in your group, introducing yourselves to each other, what your backgrounds are, and talking about what you hope to gain, seeing whether you have the same things in mind, different things in mind. That's a 6-minute activity. We then double again, and you become 2 groups of 4. Again, trying to see if you can come up with commonalities, differences, so that you have, in a sense, a list of expectations and needs or hopes of what you would like to achieve. And finally, as an entire group, an entire table, we would like you to develop a list of these and vote on the one that seems most important to you. Hold that until the end of the day when you will be reporting it, but it's something that will also enable you as you participate in the rest of the day's activities, and in fact in the workshop for the entire period, to think through constantly, keeping in mind what your goals are, what you hope to achieve, to see whether what is happening is meeting those needs, and to consider how best to make the workshop work for you. We have butcher's paper if you would like to use that. We have overhead transparencies with pens so that whoever is chosen as the spokesperson can make a report at the end of the day using a transparency. Shall I first maybe give you about 5 minutes as a group to choose a leader and a spokesperson, remembering that the leader is the one who kind of makes sure the group is getting its tasks done, and that this person can give informal feedback to us, and the spokesperson who will speak publicly this afternoon, really just for a few minutes to talk about what your hopes and expectations were.
I believe that we are all unique and that each person here has something very special to offer. So your questions, your suggestions and your reflections, each one is of value and very important to someone here. Suppose what I want to point out today is that you are among the cream of this state's human resources. You supervise the honours students, the master's students, and the PhD students in this state. So how many prime ministers, business leaders, and Nobel Prize winners are going to pass through your hands? You are the people who are developing the human resources of Australia's wealth. But we're here to take the time to hear what our colleagues have to say, and then to take the time in your own sessions that you run back in your own university to hear what your students and what your peers have to say. So, now's your opportunity. Table 1, Anne-Marie.
I'm not very confident that I've listed all of the points of consensus at a table consisting of a molecular biologist, a musician, an anthropologist, a finance person. Being a feminist criminologist myself, I tend to lean towards penalty. Basically, we wanted to walk away with some awareness, an increased awareness of the training process involved in supervision, walk away with some sense of the skills we needed to acquire and develop relating to roles, styles, procedures, policy and performance indicators, and perhaps we'll address these in more detail throughout the conference. The second point of consensus was to develop an awareness of the strategic utilisation of resources, which would enable us to be more effective in helping our students and to use networking techniques for ourselves and for postgraduates as well, and a sensibility or an awareness of how we ourselves are situated in relation to other supervisors, and an appreciation of the quality and standards of supervision. Thanks.
But the key thing was for people wanted to know, to gain some specific skills for good supervision in developing faculties and universities. They call those things strategies and techniques and things like that. And it sounded to me in the discussion that they wanted to actually take some of these ideas home, to have them in their hands and take them back with them. We need to know the qualities of good dissertation. And I should point out there's a special mention in that, and that was especially qualitative studies and the particularly difficult qualities of good qualitative studies. And just to show you that we did our work diligently, but to take up not much time, number 12 also are rated relatively highly to develop. We want to know how to develop this research culture. How do you actually get it going? So what we're looking for today and in the future of the conference is to find out some very tangible things of how to do this.
We came down to the micro processes of the relationship between the supervisor and the student, and we were looking at basically we want all these questions answered before we go home in detail in one day. What constitutes good research and competent leadership? Now, on the part of the supervisor, what is the role of the supervisor with regard to time management, organising the time of, what should be handed in when and so on? What's the role of the supervisor on the research and thesis program? How much lead should the supervisor take? How much leave to the student? For monitoring, reporting, exactly what does the supervisor do? What are the responsibilities there? Once again, the question that's come up today about diagnosing problems. How alert should we expect the supervisor to be for when the student's having problems? What should the supervisor do? How quickly should we get, what's a normal amount of time to take for a reading of a chapter, of a thesis? How quickly should we get it back? And comment on drafts and so on. And what's our role then in the thesis examination or preparation? And do we choose the examiners, or should we take examiners that the students want? The next part then was the students' role. To what length should they go to find out the regulations over doing a research thesis? Should they have say in contact? Should they decide once a week, once a month, whatever, or should that be shared jointly? If there are problems, should the student seek out the supervisor? Program, reporting progress. So when to report, that goes on. Should the student have to find out about safe working practices? Should that be up to supervisor to make sure the student knows? Should the student contribute to the research ethos of the place, be expected to go to meetings and so on, to research presentations? Should the student be expected to make presentations at conferences and meetings? And one other thing that came up just lately, representation on faculty boards. Should the students have a place there? And should they be expected to contribute to the training of other postgrads, work with their peers in that field?
The first is obviously informational. That is, we'd like to get a knowledge of different policies and practices as they exist currently across the spectrum of institutions represented here. We'd like to know a bit about the research which has been done on postgraduate supervision and problems associated with that. We thought of the skills needed to manage relationships with students. Again, we're not talking about counselling them, but there is a certain non-cognitive side to managing the relationship with a candidate. How to motivate them, how to encourage them, how to give them positive feedback rather than to belittle them, how to regulate their progress, given that it's a long-term a long-term project, a thesis, probably the longest thing that one has to concentrate on in one's life. We looked at process. We'd like to know a few skills about how to develop a topic for a student who doesn't have a topic. Obviously that's a kind of humanities, social science concern. One person on our table is or has a research student via distance education mode. Again, what sort of problems, specific problems do these students have?
The rural remote distance education issues come up again and again today, and we were of the opinion that it's not just a future information technology, that in reality there are many of us who are inexperienced supervisors who are new to supervising this process, who are supervising remote students, and that there are many pitfalls but many challenges within that, different to the face-to-face interaction, where we have colleagues in our departments who only know how to supervise in face-to-face mode, and we're now new supervisors who are supervising by distance, and we're really keen to have some input in that area. The aspect of intellectual property came up in supervision skills, and I guess we talked about that a lot in terms of the editing issue and where does the work stop becoming students' work and start becoming the supervisor's work, and in the final stage of drafts and editing to gain some input in that area. The other issue that we looked at was dealing with different methodologies, and again the cry for some input on qualitative methodologies as well as quantitative methodologies came from the table as well. We're also interested, because of some of members at our table, where creative outcomes and products do not necessarily equal theses, and some input on supervising pieces of work which may be collection of musical works or artwork that goes to galleries, or sculptures, say, that are exhibited in museums or whatever, where a student's work isn't a thesis that actually gets examined in the way we see more traditionally, and to try and get some input on in that area as well. We talked a lot about models of supervision, particularly in new campuses where there are not very many experienced supervisors, the issue of individual supervision, committees, and appointment of co-supervisors. And in these situations, what's the best way to make a committee work for you as a student, and what are the ways to make co-supervision work?
Okay, our group tended to go for super aims. Every time we came up with a new point, it got subsumed under the last aim. So the first one, the top priority, tended to be managing the supervision process itself, things that other groups have already mentioned. Okay, other areas of concern in the supervision process, styles, freedom of the scholar within the process, basically that sharing of the responsibility, I suppose, and how much freedom the student has. Difficult students, the ones who, for example, who just refuse to take any bit of advice and go away and do their own thing and then come back and expect you to approve of it. And also one that was brought up was managing concurrently the process of being supervised and acting as supervisor for those who are getting their own PhDs. Second, developing a research culture, which is fairly common as well, particularly at a new university with limited resources and conflicting expectations, especially those CAEs, former CAEs, for example, whose emphasis still is mainly on teaching and whose administration still haven't sort of caught up with the idea that they now have to allocate resources, time, etc., to research and research supervision.
One of the good points about having all of those expectations and so on at the end of a day like this is that the presenters are all here, so they've had that sort of feedback. What we'll do now is that those will all be keyed in, and hopefully we'll have a printout of those ready for you tomorrow and also on Friday.